We were aware of things in Europe which were going on, upsets in Germany in particular. That was always a worry, especially to people that had been through World War One, because after all, Australia went to that war and they lost 60,000 dead. When I turned 18 in 1942, we all had to register for service, whether it be in Army, Navy or Air Force, unless you're in a protected job that was necessary. And so I went into the Army in 1942. I remember my mother coming to the bedroom where I slept and saying something's going on. I could hear a lot of noise. And she had the window open and you could hear the gunfire going on. It turned out to be, well, of course, the Japs got in with their submarines. They came into the harbour, yeah, they were sunk in the harbour, but they did hit a ferry with a torpedo aimed for American cruisers. I was sent down to Albury to a place called Hume Camp, Hume Weirs, on the Murray River, and it was an artillery training camp. So we were being taught how to work 25-pounder artillery guns. Eventually that camp was closed in early 43 and they moved us up to Greta. We were there and we were training in, again, still artillery. Then I think the powers that be decided that they wanted more infantry. So we were loaded onto a train and sent up to Tenterfield and we went into infantry training camps and also machine gun training camp. They're called the second. And that's when I was transferred into that and became learning how to use a Vickers machine gun. Jungle training was done out of Canungra, which was on the border there between Queensland and New South Wales in the mountains there. That's where we did our jungle training prior to going to forward reinforcement camp out of Charters Towers, called Selheim, and we were there until we were then sent forward up onto the Atherton Tablelands to the 6th Division, and I ended up being at that time with the 2nd 3rd Machine Gun Battalion, whose officers or headquarters found they were overloaded with people, so they called a roll, in which I was one of the members, and we were sent across to the second Machine Gun Battalion at Ravenshoe, and that was then from the 6th Division to the 9th Division, that particular battalion. And so we went away with them. We went down in trucks down towards Townsville. We were put on a train, and then the train went to Townsville Wharves, where we were put on an American troop ship and sent off to the islands. We left on a American troop ship and we went to Morotai. At Morotai we trained because we were getting ready to go and do the landings at Labuan Island in the Brunei Bay. And so we were loaded onto this ship, which was an Australian troop ship, and we went across to Brunei Bay, and we had an Australian cruiser, but also we had American warships. And then we had to go down the side of the ships on ropes into the barges, and they were firing over the top of us. And of course now and again there was a stray one that exploded prematurely. But we got there without any casualties until we hit the beaches in Labuan. When we went past what was the aerodrome at Labuan, aeroplanes couldn't land there because of all the bombing that had been done to them. And later on, they were sent back to and put on the barges and went across to what was called then British North Borneo. We landed there and we went by barge up the rivers, and then we were stopped at certain places to clear any Japs out and things of that nature. I can remember we went by barge up one of the ways, and when we got to the place we were going, some of the people who got there before us, they had some coffee on. So we had a cup of coffee, which was very nice. The salvos were good because we'd be going on a track somewhere or other, and then you get to the top of a ridge and there'd be a salvo boiling a tin up of water for make tea for give to the blokes as they came through. They were marvellous. We had Atabrine tablet every day, so that Atabrine was anti-malarial, so that we didn't get many cases of malaria. We marched across jungles and places and got to this place where we had to go where the Japs were holding, and there was a bit of confrontations going on there and one thing and another. Eventually we marched up on a railway line that had been used for taking products up and down on the coastal area, and we went and ended up at a place called Papar. And of course there was a river there called the Papar River and Village, and of course the bridge was bombed a few days before we got there by the Air Force, so that the Japs couldn't send reinforcements down. And that's where we were until the end of the war, actually, because that's where we were when the bomb was dropped, because they were vicious, and they'd been vicious for many years, and they were taught to be vicious because they'd been in Manchuria and China, and wherever they went, they ruled the same way. And if they'd got to Australia, it would have been the same. I was sent from, I was still a young man. I had my 21st birthday at Papar in Borneo. And when the war ended, we were brought back to Labuan Island, which was the headquarters of 9th Division. And then in January, they were put on a ship. The ship was going to Australia, but it was going to Australia via New Guinea, via Rabaul. We younger ones, we were offloaded there, and we were to take over to allow other older members of the armies that had been there before, and they took our places on the ship, and they ended up in Brisbane. So I didn't leave there until July 1946, but we were guarding it. And one day, a Japanese aircraft carrier, which was all blasted down the sides and one thing and another with bomb blasts, came into the harbour. It was loaded up with Japanese shoulder to shoulder, and when it was filled up, it was sent off back to Japan. And we were hoping it'd sink on the way. You were given so many days leave, didn't have to go anywhere or report to anybody until that time was up. And then when the time was up, I reported back to Sydney Showground. And there they discharged me there, and as they did with other people that had come back on the same day. So I was discharged in 1946 in July. The people that I'd worked for prior to my joining the army, they had kept me on their books, and they'd paid up the difference between the army pay and the pay that they paid me. So they'd put it in the bank for me. So I went back to them and went to work, and I became their sales representative, calling around on chemists and businesses, and I was there for 20 years. I met Nan, my wife-to-be, at a picnic. She and I connected, and we got together anyhow. And eventually we got married. But before we got married, I bought a block of ground at Mount Colah, for which I paid £70, because I had £600 deferred pay in the army, from the army, plus the money that was in the bank from the company that made out the difference in the army and their pay. And I borrowed about £1,500 from the RSL No. 5 Building Society. So my father being a tradesman, I had a cousin who was a carpenter and staircase builder, and I had another uncle who was a bricklayer, and between us all and tradespeople, I bought this block of ground for £70 at Mount Colah, and in the old language it was 66 feet wide by 200 feet long deep. And we built the house, and I paid it off each month, and eventually it became ours. Mind you, we never finished it really, but we were there for 53 years. the developers were coming into Mount Colah, of course, and building 2 or 3 houses on one block instead of one block as they were. And Nan said, well, we'd better move from here. Nan was rather keen on selling Mount Colah, which she'd helped to build. It was a big decision, but I certainly don't regret it because this is a lovely area. And this house wasn't like this when we came here. It was here, of course, but we didn't have things done as they are now. Mm. And we had the money because we'd sold Mount Colah at a good price. Well, cars became popular and were popular, but there weren't many around because the first car that we bought, I bought it off the man that did the tiling of our bathroom for £100. And it was a 1927 DeSoto Roadster. And my father, when we were living in the house at Mount Colah, when my father, who had been gassed also during the war, in that particular battle up in northern France and Belgium, and he died whilst we were in Mount Colah, he joined the army and was sent to Cowra as a prison guard on Italians and Japanese and German prisoners, and he used to travel firstly down in Victoria, and then it was transferred to Cowra where they had the Japanese prisoners. They were set there. But then, see, he had been gassed and one thing other than the war, and he wasn't in good health, and eventually overcame him, and he was discharged and unfit for further service. He had been to World War One. He'd been posted to the 5th Division, 55th Battalion, and went into a battle in July 1916 where they were machine gunned down, and he woke up came to in the morning with a German soldier standing over him, and he became a prisoner of war for the rest of the war years and worked in coal mines.